Well, that's just fine. But I think we can do better. These are the parts of the Executioner that don't exactly float my grav tank. So it's a simple case of moving some guns, a turret, hiding the clutter, and building some spaced armour. I'm Chris, this is Offbeat Builds, and today I'm cutting up a tank. Starting with the turret, in fact. Since I'm deforking the armament, all of the details on the front of the turret were chopped away with a razor saw and cleaned up with some adversarial rubbing. This left some fairly sizable holes in the mantlet, which I chose to hide with some 1mm styrene sheet. The alternative would have been to cap off the back of the holes and fill the remaining gaps, but life is short and honestly, who doesn't prefer a thick mantlet? Anyway, the seam in the plastic sheet needed some minor filling, so I broke out the sprue goo, which I've explained far too many times, so hopefully editing me remembers to put something on the screen instead. After some more friendly friction, I turned my attention to the heavy laser destroyer. I used some 12mm styrene tube for the section that mounts directly to the turret. After cutting this roughly to size, I used an angle finder to, well, you get the idea, before translating said angle to the tube and cautiously hacking it in twain. Once it was bonded to the mantlet, I rummaged around in the bits box and found this. The Baneblade cannon looked suitably sized, but goes hard on the rivets, so I did away with a bunch of them. The barrel was then relocated to its forever home. I took the opportunity to make sure the front of the mantlet was as clean as possible, since the next step would make it pretty hard to reach. Space Marine armoured vehicles tend to have their armaments shrouded in armour sections, so I searched the bits box for something appropriate and came up with this bit from the Storm Talon engine assembly. The internal structure was clipped away and the external details removed. The resultant mess needed smoothing off with progressively fine grades of sanding stick and a final polishing with a fiberglass pencil. After substantial procrastination, I traced the mantlet angle onto the part and proceeded to cut it very carefully, hoping that I got my measurements right since, well, I only had the one part. Thinking back, I probably should have just made it from styrene to avoid all the stress. But it fit, mostly. No matter how careful you are with this kind of thing, some filling is inevitable, and after undertaking an unprompted side quest to extend the top of the mantlet, I broke out the sprue goo again. While the liquid plastic was becoming less liquid, I got to work relocating the Gatling cannon. Since this was going to displace the heavy bolters, it was simply a case of squaring off the rear of the gun, plating over the locating sockets for the bolters, and gluing the Gatling cannon in place. In my completely unimportant opinion, moving the turret rearward makes the biggest difference to the look of this tank. Not only does it improve the outline of the model, it also brings the proportions a little bit more in line with that of a modern main battle tank. Which is all well and good, but it does mean removing all of this. I started out with a fresh blade in the scalpel, but quickly gave up and deployed some rotary doom. It's easy to go overboard with the sanding drum, as its proficiency in turning miniatures into airborne microplastics is unparalleled. But in a rare bout of restraint, I didn't sand through the part and into the core of the earth, so was able to clean up the plasticky mess with some needle file action and a whole lot of sanding. Rather than filling all the holes individually, I took the easy way out once again and added another armour plate made from 1mm styrene sheet. Instead of making use of the existing turret ring, I decided it should get into the ocean, and after securing the two halves of the turret together, I plated over the gap with some 2mm styrene. I don't care for movable parts on miniatures, but if you like to play with your toys, then this would be a good time to make an axle from a bit of styrene rod. Anyway, that's about where it'll sit when I get round to the glue stage, but before that, here's a plug. The side profile of the Repulsor is more cluttered than I'd like, and the anti-grav generators and the porch are the biggest culprits. Instead of reworking all of that, I'm smoothing out the whole profile by filling in the gap, taking inspiration from the old Forge World spaced armour kits for the Rhino. Once again, this is constructed from styrene sheet, 2mm thick stuff to be precise, which does require a bit more effort to cut. But what it lacks in user-friendliness, it makes up for in heft, which, well, it's pretty important for armour. And that's doubly the case when you laminate two layers together, obviously. Once the glue was doing its job, I gave the side some attention with the angry paper before attaching a handful of styrene spacers to the rear. The side panels of the Repulsor had a date with the clippers to make space for the new armour, which was then bonded in place, awaiting the final detailing steps of the build. But before we get to that, there were some other bits to take care of. First of which was the removal of the handrail loop things at the rear by the engines, which don't make any sense to me. Clippers, then sanding, as you'd expect, and the same can be said for the hand grip things on the front anti-grav generators, which, well, I just can't explain why they'd be there. With the main superstructure of the model now assembled, it was painfully clear that there was quite a lot of filling needed along the seams. Not a beginner-friendly kit, this one. Anyhow, after a few hours of sprue glue and sanding action, I was ready to move on to some light riveting. Space Marine tanks have very fine domed rivets, so I broke out some 0.5mm nail art beads. Unlike some of the other beads you may have seen me use in builds before, these are finer and spherical, which means you need to drill a 0.5mm hole to a depth of 0.5mm in order to get them to sit correctly on the surface of the model, which is actually much easier to do than it sounds. Then it's simply a case of securing the bead with a bit of superglue and, well, you can just montage your way through the rest. Moulded plastic antennae always look ridiculously overscale to me, so they met their clipper fate. The bases were then drilled to accept some 1mm piano wire, and once said wires were secured in place, the whole assembly was located on the rear counterweight section of the turret. Now, this part of the defensive array looks pretty cool actually, but it sticks out too far from the turret, ruining the silhouette. So I hacked away about half of the depth with a razor saw and remedied the hack job with some more amiable abrasion. On the turret itself, the locating studs were cut away and the mess cleaned up in the usual fashion, before affixing both of the, I'm guessing, grenade launchers onto either side of the front. One of the other parts of the defensive array suffers from the same issue, but it does look a bit like half of a Cyclone missile launcher. Now you can probably see where I'm going with this. Glue a pair of, I want to say bolter pods to some styrene sheet, laminate some more plastic to make a mounting point at the rear, glue on a pair of uprights to the side, and bedazzle the whole thing with some more rivets, then take a left turn. I realised that the spare wheels included in the Baneblade kit are the same size as the coupler on the Repulsor, and probably other Space Marine tanks for that matter. So, by clearing away some of the surface detail, cladding it in 0.5mm styrene, and giving it all a nice clean-up, I had myself a ready-made rotating hub upon which I could mount my Cyclone Defense Missile Bolter pod system pod. What? We're into the final stretch now, and I assembled the engines as dictated by the instruction propaganda sheet. Though I did do away with the heat shields and the extra exhaust because, well, I just didn't like them very much. Though I did put the twin heavy bolters in the latter's place because this silly tank is literally covered in guns, so I guess anything's fair game. Then it was simply a case of making an appropriate base. The flyer stand you get with the kit doesn't really fit my needs, so I decided to make my own, embedded in some cork tiling offcuts to help hide my crimes. The stand itself is simply some telescoping styrene tube. Nothing too fancy here, but it works as advertised. And that, as the saying goes, is a Space Marine Primaris Repulsor Executioner, a name that rolls off the tongue as elegantly as a giraffe gives birth. I'm pretty happy with most of the changes I've made to this one, and I think it definitely looks a bit more purposeful. That being said, I should have spent some more time making the main gun look more like an energy weapon, but that one got away from me a bit. Can't win them all. Anyway, next time I'm revisiting the Retro Future Guard, which should be good. Probably.